Hey, what's up guys, it's Bronson. In today's video we're going to be tattooing a color realistic portrait, and this video is absolutely packed with lots of pro tips to helping you tattoo color realism. So let's get into it. So getting started on this tattoo, I'm making myself as comfortable as possible with a 13 round mag as I'm starting the beard. Beards with this texture being so sharp, it can be quite a hard texture to do, and there's quite a few different techniques and passes that you need to go through it. Just like always, I want to make sure that I'm being quite efficient while I'm tattooing. I'm not getting caught up in small details straight away, so I want to start with a kind of a looser hand movement and a larger mag. So the 13 round mag is really big for the size of this piece. And if you see how I'm working now, I'm not doing the beard right up to the face at this moment. I don't want all the beard to look the same sharpness wise. As I'm getting away from the portrait or the face, I want the kind of pockets in the beard to be a little bit looser, and you'll see as I get closer to the face I make sure to drop my needle size, so it's automatically going to give that effect, because now these pockets that I'm putting in now with a 13 round mag, they're all quite large. And I think it's really great to have all the focus and sharpness as center to this portrait as we can. So as we're getting a little bit further away slowly from the portrait, I want to create a little bit of blurriness, and that's really going to make the sharpness that we're putting into the facial features stand out. So as I'm getting closer to the portrait and where the hairs start to go onto the face, I'll be using sharper needles such as my liners and a 7 round mag. Now I'm just starting on the right side of this portrait, quite high up already, but I don't want to be wiping onto the stencil too much, so I'm getting all this black mapped in. And also the black needs to be in quite early so I can use the color without that dark pigment contaminating my nice tones. So now that my black's in, I'm starting with some of the blues on the jacket, and you can see I'm running my mag over some of the blacks that I've placed in softly, starting with a really deep dark blue so that it is matching that black and can sit on top of the black well, and then making sure that it's kind of whipped out on a soft edge so I can pass this new tone over it. And really all I'm doing is I kind of kept that ink in the needle, and then I'm using one of my lighter tones to wash that down, so I'm not always having to recreate the whole color. Quite often I'm just topping up the tip of the cartridge. And that in itself is such a huge hack with color tattooing. There's going to be so much relevance with all the tones and the gradient from your darks to lights if you're just effectively thinking what needs to be done to this pigment that's in my cartridge to be that tone that's sitting next to it. So just thinking that next step ahead, do you want to make it perhaps lighter or warmer or cooler? And that's just the decisions that I'm constantly making in my head. Now here's my inks for the tattoo. If you see this bottom lower right part, these are my really dark tones and really high in chroma. So these are all really deep, strong pigments. And then as we get to the opposite side of the palette, we get into some softer tones and tones that are really great for mixing and making these unique tones. And you can see how I'm working through this jacket. I'm trying to keep it as simple for myself as I can. So I'm really first and foremost thinking of the value of the color that I'm using. So once I get my darker tones in, then I can work on my kind of mid-tones in the area. Perhaps then I'll boost up the chroma in some of these deep, nice looking shadows, and then I'll begin to just add some white into the cartridge or one of my nice mixing tones and get that into the area. Now that I'm getting closer to the portrait, I'm starting to move ahead with getting my darker tones in. Once my black's in at this higher portion than where I'm working, I can move down and focus on some of the color and the deeper tones that are in this beard, as not all of it is black and grey and in the shadow. The left side is like quite lit up, so there's a lot of off-white light tones and then also some dirtier pigments. And now I'm starting to work in my deep reds in next to these blacks, so pulling the tones out of the shadows. A really easy way to start doing this and a kind of simpler process is to really mix your tone from a black, wash it out a little bit, and then dip into something really high chroma, something that's almost that red wine richness in pigment and chroma. I find having that subtle hit of black ink floating in the cartridge really helps the tone relate to these really dark shadows and bring out from that really naturally. And now I'm starting to pack the tones into this beard. One thing about this beard taking so long at the start, I took my time and I did the process properly. My blacks that I put in were packed in really well, so now I'm able to take a slight shortcut and mag over a lot of these tones. I don't have to get in and be so fiddly with a liner to pack into these little gaps. I can carefully use my mag, and then the outcome is something like this. You can see I have passed through with a sharper liner already to get those nice little crisp bits, but they're only in that portion that's close to the portrait. And then as you look away from that, the beard becomes almost like a smoky, crazy texture washing out, and it's something that finishes the piece a lot better than the piece being so sharp and being cut off like that. And starting the lips as well, you can see the process that I'm using for any aspect of this tattoo is really similar. I start with high chroma and a dark tone value so that I can map things in. But I don't start with my highest chroma. You can see right now I'm using almost a grayed out purple kind of earthy tone. And then I'll move into something that's a bit more chromatic once I've got a little bit mapped in with that kind of grayed out purple. Now I can move into this deep shadow, this kind of wine red tone. And this is just mapping this tone as well. You'll see I pass over it again with something a little bit deeper, but this is kind of the average tone for that area, and then I can apply my darker tones to it and my lighter tones, and then that area is complete. That's another thing to think about. It might just be for myself, but personally I like to kind of slowly fill the skin up really. I don't want to get in and pack it so heavy straight away. I really like to almost get that blacks down, then get that really deep rich tone sitting in next to the black, and then moving out into the shadows, maybe start it off a little bit grey and then slowly keep pumping up the chroma until it's sitting perfect. The value's right because I put in that shadow, and then you can put in such a rich tone on top of the shadow that you've laid down, something more grey. But if you hit that with something really chromatic, it just pops exactly how that shadow should and looks really realistic. So don't rush anything with color. Like, it's really, honestly, the process, it's not fun until the piece is done and then it looks amazing. But there's so many times where it's all just like doused, and a lot of this that's going on, especially I had to spend so long doing this beard, so it kind of took it out of me by the time I got to tattooing the portrait. And all this piece was done in about 6-7 hours, so there was a lot of pressure on myself to kind of complete this piece and get it done to a high standard that I'm happy with. And I really haven't been doing much color. Honestly, I haven't done really a color portrait for about 3 years, until just recently at a tattoo convention. I just really wanted to push myself and not play it safe and do black and grey. I wanted to try do the best that I could, the largest tattoo I could, and the best, and really see what I was capable of. And it paid off. I was able to walk away with an award for the colour piece that I did on the Friday. And it made me think that I shouldn't play it safe with my career. Like, black and grey for me is like, I go to work and it feels easy. No matter what walks through the door, I just know that I can nail it. And it's nice feeling like that, but I think it would be lazy if I didn't push myself to achieve more and not play life safe in an area where this is comfortable and it's working. If I can make myself more uncomfortable and constantly push my limits, then I think I'll be able to achieve a lot more, be in a better place, I suppose, like ranking tattoo wise, right? And then also you guys are going to be able to learn more the better that I get. But back to the tattoo. So I am using a 7 round mag to get these really sharp, nice areas of the beard in, starting with my darker tones and then moving into my deeper and richer pigments that border and come out of the shadows. And once I have made these fundamentals and like the basic foundations of the black anchoring all these shapes, then I can really start having fun, and the rest of the tattoo becomes a lot easier if you put in this hard work and do these steps properly through the tattoo. You'll make the rest of the process really enjoyable. So you can see now I'm working in the lighter values of this tone with a liner, getting in those really nice sharp individual hairs really. And now I can get to work on the lips and filling in these mid-tones and really shaping in where my highlights are going to sit, and just continuing that color process from dark and rich to my light and off-white tones. And you really do want to create almost that mid-tone or slightly lighter than mid-tone for the lip area, and then overuse it a little bit, but don't pack it solid. So you can map everything in with this, and it can be almost that undercoat for then you to put in a richer and more chromatic tone, and you can also punch a lighter tone on top of it, and it's really going to work well for both those variations. And now I'm working on underneath the lip. As I kind of halfway move through an area, I can work back down and start finalizing this area. So it's a little bit back and forth, but I am starting to kind of work out the shadows and the edge of the lips and start to pack in this area by the beard, that blank part of skin. And then I do, once I get these kind of, that mid rough tone that I'm talking about, the body of it, then I can go through and work out how I want that to pull out of the shadow. Do I need a little bit more tone coming out of there, like I'm doing now, getting a darker, richer tone and pulling it out of the shadows so that the beard isn't just randomly stopping there on the face. And then since that tone is in my cartridge, and it's actually perfect for a lot of these shadows, or at least to start off these areas, so I go ahead and use it. That's another really good thing to do, is if you have a tone that's in your cartridge, look where else you can put it. And here I'm really making this area a bit more chromatic, a lot nicer to look at, having that deep tone there. So I can start to work up the image a little bit more, getting the foundation of my black in, using the small mag. It's going to give me a lot of variation on what I can actually do with it, the direction, and whether I want it to be softer or more solidly packed. So try not to rush into using a liner here straight away. These smaller mags really put you in control of being able to make the variations from something being sharp and solidly packed to more the shadow kind of feathering out in a certain direction. So here I can just lightly scratch the area, making sure that that's marked and that's not going to wash the stencil off. And then in other areas I can slow that hand speed down a bit more using the edge and packing this in nice and solid. So that's all without changing needles, and it's not breaking my focus at all. I can keep with one tool in one area and really effectively work through that. Even scratching these eyelashes in really softly And all of this has been done without changing my ink, without changing my needle, and I've been able to really effectively move through this area of the portrait. Now getting in my really solid areas of black and parts that are really indefinitely black, sharp and solid areas of pigment, so I can map that in with the liner, something that's really going to punch that in. Passing over some of my mag work to really make that solid, and also on this eye here doing the same thing. And then once my black is in, I can move on and put in this really deep high chroma red that really sits well as a warm shadow in areas close to my black, especially around the eye. You still want it to be interesting and have some color pigment, not have your darks just black and muddy tones, rather have a rich high chroma pigment. Looks a lot nicer. And then I really just work my way down in values and chroma with the new tones, and then putting it in both sides of the eye at roughly the same time, so I'm not having to recreate this pigment. You can see this tone that I'm using now is very light in value and low in chroma. But a tone like this serves as a really good base kind of tone or a mid-tone, and since it's quite flat and quite light in value, a high chroma pigment can be added over the top of it and almost glaze over that tone to help add chroma to it at a later stage. But using tones like this is great for the early stages of mapping a portrait. Since it is quite light in value, it does allow for a high chroma pigment to really affect this neutral and light value tone. It will get contaminated by higher chroma or darker value tones. So now starting the shadow area under this hat, making sure that I'm thinking about what it is that I'm tattooing and that this eyebrow is all shaped and flicking off in the right direction. And these grooves, they're not too dark as well. Quite often you can see them overdone. So just scratching that in for now, and then I'll come back with the appropriate tones. And starting to work my darker colors into this shadow area. I really think that if you're doing a color portrait, your dark tones is an opportunity to get these really high pigment tones in. So don't look at shadows and try make a muddy tone. Try find an excuse to use these really deep magenta reds and these really high chroma tones, because quite often shadow is just a high intensity of this kind of light reflection or whatever's going on. So even here, the tone that I'm using is kind of black and a dark matter tone, and also a deep magenta and red to really make sure that this pigment is as full as I can get it and as interesting as possible. Otherwise, I think it might as well just be a black and grey tattoo if you're not going to make the most of these shadows and the colours that are really there. And with the lighting that's used for this video as well, quite often these tones look black in the video that I'm looking at now, but this tone that I'm using now is just a very, very deep tone. So yeah, try stay away from these blacks, and if you want to use a black, even put some deep tone into the black as well. Not into your ink cap, but into the cartridge. So always mixing in your cartridge or needle, but at the same time you do want to dip multiple times, because every dip into a different ink cup is slightly getting you more accurate. You know, here I think I'm dipping about 5 times to create this one deep tone. So there's 5 to get that perfect balance of everything. You know, the first dip might be your value or your rough color, and then next might be your level of chroma, and then you might want to slightly warm that or cool that or lighten the value. So do really play around with dipping a few times. You know, you don't want to just use the color yellow from the bottle from your ink cap. Really see how you can create your own tones and your own palette, and I think taking these moves will really set your work apart from others as well. So most of my shadows are in, so I can start working on these lighter value and better saturated, higher chroma tones that really make the portrait, and they're a lot of fun to work with. So once all your fundamentals are done, it's really time to start ripping into those. Yeah, these nice bright tones, and also some of these peachy kind of reds that are sitting along the edge of this shadow that are really nice to work with. I'm really starting to get the structure and the kind of layers of sculpting this portrait out now. Almost as if this tattoo is black and grey, but there's just that nice vibrance and saturation there. So here I have a tone that's just a little bit kind of light to mid-tone. So if you're struggling with colour, then try and just look at things that way. If you feel like you're not understanding much of this tattoo, then try and view it as more of just what is the value. Because the colour theory is something that's really easy to learn. If you know how to tattoo and you know how to do a black and grey portrait, colour isn't that hard to really get into, and I think a lot of people are scared of it, you know. So perhaps just try viewing it in a different way. So you can see here I'm really starting to fill out this right side of the cheek, and then once those darker tones and the structure's in, I can move in with these lighter, nice off-whites, really nice warm and yellowy flesh tones. And I'm always, whenever I tattoo colour, I always kind of have a certain colour that I'm really enjoying just finding in these portraits, and that warm soft yellow tone just there has really been a tone that I've really liked creating and finding a nice place for in a lot of these portraits. And now what I'm doing here, I think is almost one of the most important parts of this whole tattoo, or something that's so important to me. I had magged in all of these tones before now, but with colour, colour automatically smooths itself out. So whereas with black and grey you can get a lot of texture with mags, but with colour you do want to step into something sharper. Even these liner movements are still looking soft, but if this was black and grey, that would really be affecting these areas. So since this portrait, like this isn't a female portrait, and I want to make sure the viewer knows that by looking at it and relates to what the image is. So I want to add a little bit of age. You know, this isn't a female portrait. I don't want it to look airbrushed or anything like that. I want it to look lifelike and have these kind of imperfections and slight kind of dimple, like aged look, rather than something so perfect. So the 7 round liner that I'm using now to make sure that these kind of tones and values are sharply sitting next to each other and giving that correct look, rather than something so smooth and airbrushed how it was looking before. And I'm also using a really high chroma tone here. See how red this ink is? But since there's like a base of a slightly muddier tone underneath it, if I just glaze and lightly use that needle, it's just going to brighten up that area. And now starting to get in some of these really fun highlights that I've left in the beard area. I think this is like just the best part of colour tattooing, is once you get into your highlights. I'm even like rushing it to kind of see what it looks like. But this is like a warning. This is incorrect to do your off-whites, or especially your whites, so soon. They can get really easily contaminated. So this should actually be your last step. But I'm just like a little bit too excited and really just wanted to see how this tattoo was going to look. Completing this small area 100% gave me a lot of insight to be like, yep, everything's on track, you know, kind of like just checking the cake in the oven a little bit. And now I spend a bit of time just making sure that the level of chroma and the color of everything is right. I do think with a color tattoo, you do want to make the most of that and get some real color in there. I did used to play things a little bit natural and dull and dirty tones, but I do like quite a bit of color now, especially getting inspired from other artists out there. So finding excuses on where these colors really are and belong. And then once that's in, I can kind of start with some of these lighter tones, working these in closer to the beard. And the tones that are close to the beard are quite often also the highlights in the beard in that area. And then just sharpening up some areas of this nose, getting that shape in right. And now starting to work into some of the highlights of the lower portion of this portrait. So I'm starting with these off-whites, which I always like to overuse an off-white before using an actual white. I think with realism, especially quote hyper-realism, the white is just overused at times, trying to create these static, noisy type of images, rather than the color and the tone actually being correct. So it's always good to step into an off-white before really thinking what is white in this image. So you can see I'm just leaving for this small part here my true white highlight, and then making sure that I'm really packing that in nice and solid next to these really white pinks that I've surrounded for the rest of these highlights. And the variation in value is really everything in tattooing anyway, so it's such a good excuse to stay away from white actually, and just have small hits of it. And you can see here I'm using another muddy tone for the eyes, again not white. And now the highlights of the nose, this is another really important part, just as important as the shadows. Again, these are all my off-whites first. So these are the same kind of the pink tone that I had in the lips, really just shadowing the warm areas of this nose, and then in with the highlights. These really sharp and precise small areas, you know. I don't just want to mag in a lazy highlight. I want to get these nice, sharp and definite kind of areas really sharply blocked in. This portrait in itself would definitely be the worst reference that I've worked for doing a color portrait. So the information that was on the reference, I almost had to really dig out to get all the information from looking at the reference. Usually something is so clear and a really nice HD reference, but this was the opposite. So where the reference gave me a little bit of information, I almost had to double it, to double the depth and the sharpness, and to think about the curves that is actually happening on the face, and really make a little bit of this information up. And one of the worst things is, since the shot is just a little screen grab from a movie, the image itself was quite cinematic and really flat tone-wise. It's borderline black and grey. So it's the first time I've really stepped in and put these colours in without really being told to from the reference. So that was quite a nice challenge as well. And you can see I'm using a round liner, a 7-round liner, in areas where perhaps usually you've seen me use a mag before. And that's just because I really want these tones to sit so sharply next to each other. I want it to look like a puzzle piece, how tight these slight values are really interlapping and washing over each other. So for that large highlight where I could have usually fit a mag in, since this is a color piece, I need to saturate the skin so much. And then stepping back into a little bit more mag work, getting the color of everything right and everything blending over with each other. A larger mag is great for color work because it really does wash such a smooth gradient from tone to tone. And now I'm really finishing the tones and the areas left in this portrait, working with my off-white tones, but really respecting how warm or cool the actual off-white pigment is. So almost oversaturating some of these areas, and then I can wash or glaze these like super light tones over those, and it helps just add a little bit of color in there in an area which might look flat, or perhaps where the white might look overused, which I see quite often. And now just putting in some of my really heavy white highlights, making sure that they're really solid and being that final tone to help puzzle the piece together. And now after 6 hours or so of tattooing, it's time to start this hat, and then I can move on to the background and we're done. So I just start by getting this nice crisp outline done with a dark red, and then also going through and adding some variation with like an ultra dark, really high pigment tone. in there. And obviously with any kind of almost like signage area of a tattoo where you've got fonts and stuff, your main thought is just really these bold and crispiness, you know, and all of that. So making sure that everything's solid, that there's a nice negative space left for me to run some white and highlights through later on. And everything's just really nice and bold, and the 7 round liner is doing a great job of that. I remember actually doing this part of the tattoo and it's just knocking all this colour in so well. And then starting the shadows of the hat, making sure that I'm magging these in really solid, and moving on to some of these nicer, stronger reds as well before I start all the highlights left here. Making sure there's these nice high chroma edges just coming out from these black areas, and then it starts to kind of pink out a little bit as it gets to more of the peak as well. So making sure that I'm seeing these color variations and respecting that and putting that all in there. Here's a little bit more of that bright red before moving into my darker red tones. But that's the end of all of our tattooing footage. So now we can do the nice part and have a look at our finished product. Thank you guys for watching the video and making it to the end. I really hope that you guys learned something useful that you can apply into your own tattooing. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button, and I'll see you guys next time.